Welcome, everybody. My name is Al Stammers, and tonight my co-moderator is going to be Jeff Chores. And we're very, very fortunate to have four wonderful individuals, well known to all of us from throughout the world, who are going to be participating in this session, which we're calling What's the Experience, and what are people who've been doing this for 40 or 50 years, cardiovascular perfusion, what can they share, what can they tell us, what are their experiences, and what can we learn from them? So I'm going to introduce them briefly in just a minute, but before we get going, I'd like to just go over some background information that I think if you participated in these webinars before, you're well versed in. We have 1.2 category 1 ABCP points that we are giving. There's no charge, of course. All you need to do is stay logged on for 45 minutes. I don't have to ask you to do that. This is going to be thrilling. You'll wish that we were twice as long as that. There's a very, very brief survey, which I'll show you in just a moment. And you just have to submit that. CEU certificates will be emailed usually within a week's time. And then we post this on YouTube, usually about that same time. The very last slide that we'll have tonight is going to have Jeff and my email. If you have any questions at all or any problems, just email either Jeff or I, and we'll also show the four panelists emails, so you're more than welcome to reach out to them with any questions that you may want to follow up with. So to begin, these are just the survey questions that you'll be asked to answer, very, very easy. And also, if you have anything you'd like to see in future webinars in regards to subject matter or individuals, please just let us know either in the comments or the Q&A, and we'll follow up with that. This time, we normally have a presentation followed by a discussion section, but this time we're going to have all discussion. The introduction is going to be a little bit different than what we normally follow, but the entire next 57 minutes or so are going to be filled with discussion. We have questions that we have actually provided to our panelists to give them an idea of what Jeff and I will be asking, but we often, we actually would prefer that if you can use the Q&A section in the top or bottom of your screen, please put in your own questions or comments, because many of you have got significant backgrounds as well, and we'll address those to the panelists. As I said, we have four dynamic individuals well known to all of us. I'm not going to go through a full introduction. It would take more than half of the meeting to go over their impressive backgrounds and CVs. Instead, what we're going to do is, for the next few slides, I've asked the panelists to go ahead and provide us with some snapshots. And so once I start these next few slides, we're going to ask in alphabetical order for Ed Howard, Jim McDonald, Michael Miller, and Tim Wilcox to go ahead and not only to explain what we're seeing in these few slides, but also give us a little bit of background in how they've got into perfusion. As I've said, we have individuals with more than 40 years experience. Several people have more than 50 years experience. And that's just remarkable, considering that our field is only 70 years old as of last year. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and now ask Ed to go through and to bring us through a few of the slides that he has provided and give us his background in regards to how he got into perfusion and perhaps what he was doing before perfusion. So Ed?
Thanks, Al. I appreciate it. I'm Ed Howard. I helped Penn State University at Hershey, Pennsylvania, wanted to start a school of perfusion. And they asked us about that in 1977. A fellow by the name of Dennis Williams and Norman Manley were the two gentlemen who wanted to start the school with Dr. Pierce. And you might remember the Pierce Donakai left heart assist. Well, Dr. Pierce himself, we sat down over a cup of coffee and decided we'd start the school. And they asked me, with my background, if I wanted to be a perfusionist. And I said, yeah, what's in it for me? They said, we'll pay for everything, and it's going to take about 2 years. I said, okay, when do we start? So I started, and there's a picture of my last case after we got the school accredited, and I left in 1979 or so. We started in 77. And you can see that slide there. We had some up-to-date equipment at the time. There's a Sarnes 5000 pump. And there's a Criticon oxygen device that's no longer available. that read your oxygen right inside the blood with a meter that was not sterile, but it worked. And then it was taken off the market by the FDA, the same people that put it on the market. During my career, to make a long story short, we went to Kiev. I've been to several countries, and we went from Kiev. I went over to Yugoslavia. I've been to the Bahamas. I've traveled around United States for 10 years as a traveling perfusionist after I left my full-time job after school, which was Georgetown University. I went there in 1980 and stayed till 97, 98. I was very fortunate there to work with several doctors that are prominent. Dr. Huffnagel was just leaving, and we continue to work today in Delray Beach. Along with that, I've done some testifying to Congress about point of care testing, which was very important. And when I was in the Ukraine, it became very prominent. I took a Gem Premier blood gas analyzer there and introduced it to them for the first time. And that was quite an event. And I was a guest of the Minister of Health there. So I've had a great career and I recommend it to everybody.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really do appreciate it. Now we're going to move on to Jim.
Yes, hi everybody. My name is Jim McDonald. I started my training in actually the first part of 1968. I was at the right place at the right time. I was an operating room technician and I scrubbed for thoracic surgery, OR 11, that was OR 10 at the Victoria General Hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. OR 11 where cardiac surgery was done, and very few people had access to cardiac surgery. But luckily, the same surgeons who did the cardiac also did the thoracic. So I scrubbed for them, got to know them. And after being in ORT for 6 months, I got called into the surgeon's lounge and was told I was going to be starting on Monday to train as a heart-lung technologist. So that's what I did. There was a picture I did send to Al Stammers there that showed the K-Cross disc oxygenator, which is the original heart-lung machine that I had trained on for the first 2.5 to 3 years before we went to bubble oxygen. I don't know if you have that, Al, there or not.
Whoops.
But the bubble oxygenator, keep going back to the original one, and you'll see the K-Cross disc oxygenator, which came in 3 sizes. Infant, obviously, we were doing pediatrics and infants, and also adults. The adults took 4 liters of whole blood prime. There was no ACD in those days, so that would take a long time to explain the anatomy of the K-Cross disc oxygenator. But basically, it was 147 discs in a horizontal shaft, each picking up a thin film of blood. Therefore, it was a film oxygenator. And as it rotated at 120 revolutions per minute, not any slower, not any faster, because you would have sludging and a decrease in oxygenation. So at 120 revolutions a minute, it would pick up a thin film of venous blood. And by the time it exited on the arterial side, it was pumped by way of a roller pump into a Sargent-Brown heat exchanger and into the patient's arterial systemic circulation. This picture you see in front of you is taken in 1972. It was the first generation of membrane oxygenator. This is the Londe Edwards silicone true membrane oxygenator, not a semi-permeable membrane. The picture you see on your right is it being used on an infant at the then Children's Hospital in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And you can see it's on a weight scale, etc. It was our first use of a closed system. And at that time, we were also using the bubble oxygenator. So that'll give you a brief introduction into how I got into perfusion. And I stayed clinically active until 2010. These are the bubble oxygenators. The one on your right is being used in the animal lab. We tried everything there first. The one on the left was about 1974. There was a TV program for the older folk that remember Half Gun Will Travel. Well, this was Half Pump Will Travel. The battery operated, we could take it to the coronary care unit, surgeon do a thoracotomy, put the patient on femoral artery bypass. I must admit the success rate was rather limited. So we can move on to maybe somebody else now. Thank you. And that's myself running the Bentley bubble oxygenator, but you'll notice that I'm also using my SARM stainless steel heat exchanger because the bubble oxygenator had a very bad heat exchanger. So we're still introducing the new technology while still using some of the old. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great, great introduction. And at this point, we're going to move on to Tim.
Kia ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. Well, my name's Tim Wilcox, and I'm calling in from New Zealand. And I started in perfusion in 1972 at Green Lane Hospital in Auckland. Well known really for the surgeon you see on the left-hand picture here, Sir Brian Barrett-Boys, who made his name really in terms of developing the aortic valve homograft and in the use of hypothermia in children. If you look on the right side, the photograph shows myself with somewhat longer hair behind a Sands modular heart-lung machine with a Temtrol bubble oxygenator, and on that pole to the right of that, you can see there's a stainless steel, there's a Sands torpedo heat exchanger, and interestingly, that's in the arterial line, which people might frown upon these days. And in fact, we were doing one of these operations, and there was a viewing gallery above, and the press were there actually filming Sir Brian. He was pretty famous. And during the arrest period, I noticed that the seals on the heat exchanger and the arterial line had come to grief, and blood was pouring on the floor. So I say to Sir Brian, we've got a bit of a problem here. The heat exchanger is leaking, and he just carries on operating and says, "We'll fix it." So it was a nervous period of time while we replaced that and went back on bypass. We're also using, at this stage, we're using floor water. So we had chilled water coming from the floor to the heat exchanger, which we had a mixer to mix. Interesting days, and so clearly things have changed a lot since then. I guess that's a little introduction. Things are very different now, as you know, and we're moving into new model leave-and-over heart-lung machines, a lot of computerization. Interestingly, when we were doing pediatrics, and as I mentioned, so Brian was very big in terms of profound hypothermia, and we were using surface cooling. So it's a pretty grainy photograph, but you can see there's an infant on the table lying on a waterbed, and we'd actually developed from a mattress. We developed what was a waterbed, and we had to have a recirculation device. So the tank in the front, if you will, is a recirculating ice bucket. You can see a ballcock on there, and it recirculated water up through this water bed on the table, and we cooled these children down to 25 degrees and then put them onto bypass to limit the period of bypass. And it was a technique that was used for quite some time with very good effect. Thanks, Al. That'll do.
Yeah, that was wonderful. Thank you so much. And I'm sure you saw that on the previous two pictures, the scrub individuals, I didn't see Dr. Barrett-Boys, but they were wearing slippers, or what do we call, what do they call them? Flip-flops, excuse me, with no socks. And if you saw Tim, he had his headset on. He's always been a musician at heart, so he was listening to some pretty good music, I'm sure. And
well, actually, Al, that's kind of interesting, because in those days, the surgical assistant wore a lavalier microphone, and we had a headset on, so we could hear everything he was saying.
Wow, smart. Boy, really ahead of your time for sure. Before we get into the Q&A section, I'd like to introduce Michael. Michael Miller is a graduate of the Medical University of South Carolina. She was there when Jim Deering, one of the premier educators in the entire history of perfusion education, and a wonderful individual and a great researcher, was her mentor. And Michael graduated from there 40 years ago. So she's the youngest of this group of panelists. It's hard to believe that somebody who's practicing for over 40 years is the youngest, but she's been a long time societal member of AMSACT and multiple organizations, and is our director in Sinai Hospital in Baltimore, where she's practiced since she graduated. She's a native South Carolinian, so I'm sure she could talk to us about politics if we have time, and hopefully not. But we'll move right now into our Q&A section. So with that, I'm going to ask Jeff to go ahead and start us off with a question. And how we're going to do this is all the panelists will have an opportunity to address the questions. And we're going to go in alphabetical order. Ed, followed by Jim, Michael, and then Tim. And then we're going to ask individuals to kind of keep their answers to 1 to 2 minutes so we can get through quite a few. And we'll watch the Q&A sections. Please go ahead and fill that in, and we'll make sure those get addressed. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Jeff.
Thank you, Al. Boy, I've just got a ton of questions for you, but trying to hone in my thoughts. I want to comment on something that Tim had mentioned and ask, how common was it for all of you? Tim had mentioned you had a leak in the heat exchanger. And I just know that doing cases today, it's very rare that I have a leak. Can each of you comment, how common were leaks then, and these jury rigged and these on the spot decisions that you had to make to fix equipment? How frequent was
it? Thanks, Jeff. The leak thing is a prevalent thing from the past. I hope it stays in the past. When you're using the heat exchangers, the stainless steel heat exchangers, they had this little seal on them, and you had to make sure that that was tight, just like you say, and temperature controlled the tightness. So sometimes they would leak. The bubble traps leaked, I think, more than the heat exchangers, and they were a Pyrex glass, and you had to have a silicone seal above that. If that silicone seal didn't sit on that glass correctly, and you didn't tighten the 3 screws exactly the same around there, what would happen is, when you pressurize that to give cardioplegia or the arterial, most of the time they were the arterial perfusion bubble trap and the cardioplegia bubble trap. So when you pressurize them periodically or continuously, then they would start to leak. Bone wax is your friend in the operating room in the 70s. So we would bone wax it and hope it wasn't that big of a deal. If it's only a drop, you didn't fix it. If it was more of a spray, you had to deal with that right away. And sometimes you got blood on the floor and you had to take care of it. We don't see leaks too much today anymore unless we create them ourselves, like not tightening the water lines or something like that. But our equipment, thank God, is a lot better.
Okay, Al, I think it's my turn.
Yes, Jim, go ahead.
Well, speaking of blood leaks, well, I just mentioned briefly, too bad we didn't have the picture. I thought I'd send you the K-Cross disc oxygenator, but blood leaks were very common. This was the time when the heart-lung technologists had to scrub and assemble, partially assemble the disc oxygenator, wrap it up in muslin wrappers, autoclave it, and then put it on a sterile table, open it up, you're scrubbed in sterile. And then you had to put it together. There was no wrenches. It was the art of perfusion being taught, because you had to learn how to tighten things just enough so that they wouldn't leak blood. You would assemble it, pass it to the heart-lung technologist. He would assemble it on the heart-lung machine. We would prime it. And there was no doubt that you would never get through a case without there being blood leaking. And one had to remedy that rather quickly, obviously. You must remember that with the disc oxygenator, if you're not familiar with it at all, it wasn't just the oxygenator. You had a venous reservoir, which was put together by hand, a settling chamber, which was connected to the venous reservoir, and blood by gravity back from the patient went to both these devices, which oftentimes leaked also. So the ability to be able to put it all together took a little time, but blood leaks were very common. You would remedy that. And when we went to the disposables, we thought the blood leaks were over. Well, the hours of labor of putting the discs together, which is very similar to the male Gibbon pump, they were gone. But blood leaks in the new generation of bubble oxygenators were pretty frequent. And as Ed had mentioned, bone wax was your best friend. You always kept a lot of bone wax on your leg.
Thank you, Jim. Mike?
Yeah, I don't have as many great war stories as the rest of my panelists, thankfully. When I started pumping, it was 1984, so the Sarnes 5000 was state of the art at that point. And, we didn't have a lot of built-in safety mechanisms or built-in pressures. You had to use the old spingometers that you pumped up, and those were always leaking. But again, to reiterate, yes, bone wax was the best invention for those things. But yeah, the bubblers could be tricky too, and it was nice. You could see them actually when they were leaking. But other than that, I don't have a whole lot of nightmare
Thank you.
stories.
Good for you.
Yeah, good for me.
Timmy?
Yeah, well, I guess the only thing I recall is, of course, we didn't have snap ties in the early days with a tie gun. And we used Jubilee clips, which were stainless steel Jubilee clips, which went around the tubing to connect the tubing to the stainless steel connector. And the Jubilee clips were screwed up with a screwdriver. And as Jim mentions, you needed to get that tension on a Jubilee clip correct. You could over tighten it and cause trouble. But as the others have said, you dealt with blood leaks as they happened, and you still see them now. And I think it's still handy to have a bit of bone wax around those temperature ports that leak from time to time, we find.
Good old Dow anti-foam A as well. But I'm going to move on. Jeff, it's okay with you. Thank you so much for asking questions in the Q&A. I'm going to move into the Q&A section. I'm going to start with Joanne McCrow. Thank you, Joanne, for putting forth two really neat questions. So I'm going to start with Ed, and we'll go through the group. Other than membrane oxygenators, what do you think is the greatest breakthrough in cardiopulmonary bypass?
Other than, I didn't hear the last part of that.
I'm sorry. Other than membrane oxygenators, what do you think is the greatest breakthrough in cardiopulmonary bypass?
I think arterial filtration certainly is on the list, and we can talk about that. They went through, there was Swank filters, there was, we had discussions in the 70s in AMSEC when I was a student member of AMSEC about whether you needed a filter or not, whether it should be a depth filter or a media filter. And I think now with filtration, it's still a topic today. We've managed to put in arterial filters internal to the oxygenators. And I think that's an important thing. What else is important more than a membrane oxygenator is, our technology has gotten so good with biomedical. We have one-way valves were invented by George Saipas, all these safety mechanisms, along with the heart lung machines and the electronics, the safety mechanisms certainly are on that list too.
Thank you, Ed, appreciate it. Jim?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. There's several answers to that question, but one has to look back over their careers. I remember when I first started using the Travenol membrane oxygenator, we decided, the surgeon and myself and the other perfusionists at that time, Andy Cleland, decided that prior to going on bypass, we would drain some venous blood of the patient, maybe 100, 200 cc's, and we would coat the circuit with that. The mindset being that we were pacifying the extracorporeal circuit and making it more physiological and cutting down the pathophysiology of cardiopulmonary bypass. Now, we never did any testing on that, but I think one of the very important things that came along was the use of biocompatible circuits. And with that came, I think, much better results in terms of patient care once you learned how to use it properly. So, there's been many, over the years, many things that have happened in extracorporeal circulation. I like to use the original terminology in cardiopulmonary bypass when using pump oxygenator. I've seen it all happen over the many years, but for now, we'll just stick with the use of biocompatible circuits.
Excellent.
Excellent.
Michael? Oh, I'm sorry, Jeff, did I interrupt you? I apologize.
No, I just commenting how great it was.
Oh, Michael?
Yeah, there's a lot of changes. When I started, even there were no centrifugal pumps. It was all roller heads that seemed to beat up the blood pretty nicely, platelets. So I think that was a nice upgrade with the centrifugal pumps. And then there's also the different sources of cardioplegia. When I started, there was not anything that had to do with blood cardioplegia. It was all just crystalloid. So I think our myocardial protection has really improved, and that obviously has helped patient outcomes tremendously. So,
Oh, great point. Tim?
Yeah, Michael, I think you're right about myocardial protection. That's a huge breakthrough in terms of successfully getting patients through the operation. Servo regulation of heart-lung machines, I think. I mean, when we started, there wasn't even a low-level alarm. There was no
Right.
safety
right.
at all. And so clearly, and then, eventually with the bubble oxygenators, we got a light dependent resistor, which we stuck to the side of it. And so when the level of the blood got below that, light shone on it, it made a little beep. There were not infrequent problems associated with a lack of servo regulation in training air into the pump head, and things like that was not uncommon. So it's very difficult today to pump air into a patient. You got to try pretty hard to do that. And that's a really good thing.
Great. A quick question that Joanne also had was, what technique do you consider the most dangerous in cardiopulmonary bypass? So give it a minute to think about that. Most dangerous thing with cardiopulmonary bypass. And we'll start, Ed, with you.
Well, the most dangerous is an emergency case that you're going into and your cannulation technique is not standard. If you aren't following the surgery from your perspective, and everybody's a team, includes anesthesia, includes the surgeon, the nurses, everybody on the same page. I've seen all kind of crazy things happen during cannulation alone, trying to get somebody on bypass. They put, instead of a half connector, they put a half 3/8 in the venous line, and then you can't find out where the air is coming from. It's because the wrong connector's in the line, and you missed it because you didn't see exactly the cannulation. So you have to follow every step. And what's the most dangerous can be something you least expect. It could be during cardioplegia. All of a sudden you have an overpressurization. Even though the alarm works, that particular patient might have had a problem, and now you have a dissected coronary or something because of cardioplegia. Could be the aorta. You didn't test it right the first time. And now you go on and all of a sudden the pressure's high. The doctor, you notify them. I mean, things happen, and they happen in a split second. You have about 2 seconds to figure it out and fix it. And that's what a perfusionist does, what they do. Everybody says they don't do much. They're only on pump for 45 minutes. What'd you do today? Well, I did a lot, I'm still thinking about the last 45 minutes. But I think that the most critical thing can be dissection or stuff you don't see, unforeseen happening with us. Everything you use on a daily basis, it could still be a problem if you're not watching it.
Good comment. Thank you. Jim?
Yeah, well, that's, you could cover a chapter just talking about that. I mean,
Absolutely.
I remember I went from a time where we had, with the disc oxygenator, you had absolutely no automatic alarms, no arterial line filters. And then we went to bubble oxygenators and they introduced low level alarms. It was inaudible, didn't stop the main pump head, etc. But I've been in hospitals where I've seen perfusionists run extremely low levels with modern day oxygenator and bypassing the low level alarms that are incorporated in their system. I think that's a danger. I think the other thing is the ability to be able to communicate your concerns, to speak to your concerns during surgery. I recently had somebody say to me, well, why do you test left ventricular pump head? Why do you have the surgeon, or why does the surgeon stick the vent into a bowl of solution? Well, it's because when they come out with the ability for roller pumps to reverse, people fill the heart up with air and have massive air embolism from the reversal event pump head. So here was a technique that was supposed to improve perfusion, but in the end, it caused more problems than it was worth coming out with these multi-directional pump heads. So low-level alarms to me, when we started using them, really helped out a lot. And I heard Michael talk about biocompatible, about centrifugal pumps. Absolutely, I fell in love with those early on and used them without any problem whatsoever. They worked out extremely well. Other than that, I think we could go on for a while thinking about things that could go wrong in the operating room. But I think communication is extremely important, being able to do things properly the first time. And that's the definition, my definition of quality assurance, is doing it right the first time. So you only know how to do it one way, and that is the correct way.
What do you think is the most dangerous thing that has occurred on cardiopulmonary bypass? Not an event, but the dangerous thing that we perhaps have experienced in our practice.
Are you talking to me now, Al?
Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. Yes, I apologize.
Well, again, it's been touched on. We did not have level alarms. We did not even measure arterial line pressures, if you can believe it. So when you think of that now, it is very scary to think what could have happened, especially occasionally when the aortic cannula is misplaced. So in addition to the others, those come to mind, but thank goodness we moved forward with that. Yeah.
Great answer. Tim?
Yeah, well, I see, interestingly, if you look at the current situation, someone's posted the use of cell phones in the operating room, and that's arguably pretty dangerous. And it comes down to communication. So we're really talking safety and good communication, and trying to avoid the hierarchy that used to exist in the operating room to allow people to speak up. And certainly for many years now in our environment, everybody's on a first name basis: surgeon, anaesthetist, perfusionist, the whole lot. And I think that was a substantive change from the Green Lane days in the early years, where it was very hierarchical, and we referred to surgeons as Mr. Kerr or Sir Brian, and that reinforced that hierarchy, and certainly people would be reluctant to speak up if they saw something that was outside their sphere, but that they noticed. So the ability to people communicate well, or the converse is, if you don't have that in part creates a particular danger to the current operating room environment, in my opinion.
Yeah, Stephen Veit, I kind of want to accentuate his question, and since we're talking about historical perfusion, I think his question's good. He says, Jim, you spoke of the art of perfusion, something that he discusses with his newer perfusionists. What are some of the things that you guys feel current clinicians could learn from the past? And I know you could probably comment, and each of you could probably take 20, 30 minutes on this, but I know, see if we can keep it pretty concise so we can get around to all of you. Ed?
One of the things I think you do with the perfusion students is spend some time with the different departments. Go to cardiology where the catheters are being done. Let the perfusionists, instead of looking at the 4D echoes that we all have today, when I started, that wasn't the case. You had a cardiologist that would manually determine the gradients and stuff like that. There's not a student out there, I don't think today, that knows how to do that manually. So I think, if they think back about that, or just say, let's make a pump pack up today. We don't have any custom packs left in the storeroom. So tomorrow we're going to do a heart, but let's do our own pack. Let's see if we can make up a pack. Find the parts and see if you can make one up. I grew up with perfusion before there was a custom pack. So if the students saw that, they would understand why it takes so long to get started and so long to tear down afterwards. They're not seeing that today. Everything today just comes out of a box. They put it on. If it works, then they use it. If they were to take time and just go back and figure out how to cut tubing and roll it up and get it sterilized and wait for it to come back and then put it on in a sterile fashion. It would be interesting to watch.
Jim?
Yeah, so I think your question was had to do with being with students and what you might want them to pick up from working with you. Is that?
Yeah, that or newer perfusionists, something that current clinicians could learn from the past.
Well, I think if you have a student with you, I think it's absolutely mandatory that you do everything the way you might want the student to do. And you should teach the student what not to do. You should also be example for them to follow. And Tim mentioned this as speaking to your concerns. I'm a big believer in introducing the student to the operating room environment so that they feel that they can speak to their concerns to either myself as the instructor or to the surgeon or the anesthesiologist. Tim made reference to the earlier days where there was an empirical attitude that did exist in the operating room. I was very fortunate when I trained under the surgeons I trained with and the heart-lung technologists that I trained with. We didn't have that, but have I seen that in my career? Absolutely. And if you do run into that, you have to address that immediately. And so getting back to the students, I always say to the students, if you come to my hospital and train there, and then you finish and you graduate, and we sit down and have a beer somewhere, did I do what I told you I was going to do in class? Did I do what I said I was going to do, or what was proper? And I think that's very, very, very important when you're teaching students. You set the example for them to follow.
Thank you, Jim. Michael?
Yeah, when I was a student 42 years ago, we actually were in charge of having to set up all the transducers in the OR for anesthesia. I don't think anybody does that anymore, but that gave us a lot of insight into what happens at the head of the table as well. When I was an instructor, again, there are a lot of things I could pick out, but one thing I would always tell everyone is just to try to get into a habit for muscle memory. When you come in, whether it's setting up your syringes or drawing up, try to do it the same way every time. And that way, when you come in and you're not feeling well, or your muscle memory can take over and you can just go with the flow. I think, Fred, you're on this call. I saw your text. You could probably attest to that. You were one of my students, but yeah, and the last thing I will say is, and I still do this now with new perfusionists that come to work, not necessarily new perfusionists, but newer to the account. I'll say this is a list of things that we don't deviate from. Now there are also some things that you can do it your way, I can do it my way. I can put bicarb in, you cannot. But I always made it clear the things that were not to be deviated from, so that everybody could be on the same page with that.
Thank you, Michael. Tim?
Yeah, well, I guess in the current environment with the current technology, if you lose that technology, if you lose servo regulation, if things go wrong, you need to have had the opportunity to have learned how to deal with that. It was much easier, when we didn't have that, we had to be very innovative and ready for things to go wrong. So how are you going to practice for that? Well, simulation obviously is one opportunity, but the opportunity to work and do mission work, and we may comment on that later, in third world countries, really, and you have that opportunity today now, gives you the scenario, if you will, of putting yourself back several decades where you don't have all the bells and whistles that you do, and it's a fantastic opportunity to grow that experience in the current environment.
Thanks, Tim. Al?
Great. Thanks, all. A quick question for Jim, and then a question for all four of you. Jim, Mark Carews, that ever-observant individual, focuses life on safety from perfusion. He picked up that on one of your pictures, you had a scale above the closed venous reservoir bag. And he's
Yes.
asking, was this to give you an idea of blood volume in the circuit? And in
Yes.
what's the reason for that?
That's exactly what it is. When we started to use the Lundy-Edward closed circuit, it was the first time we used a closed system because we were using bubble oxygenators, and we went from there to the membrane oxygenator. So we decided that it would be nice to weigh the extracorporeal circuit prior to priming, and then after we primed it. Now the Lundy-Edward was coated with sodium chloride solution, so it took 3 primes. The first one was a rinse, the second one was a rinse, and the third prime was the physiological blood prime. So it was a very complicated device to run. But once you ran it, it worked extremely well. So we decided that we should probably try this out. So I went across the street to the Grace Maternity Hospital, and I absconded that scale from one of the wards and took it back. And it worked out to be extremely efficient at us knowing the volume at any one time within the circuit, whether or not the patient was taking on too much volume. And also in that picture, you might notice there was a Statham blood flow meter. So we were also measuring the blood flow, the precise blood flow in the infant and the pediatric patient. So Mark Cruz was quite right. That's exactly what it was.
Okay. Thanks, Jim. Here's a great question from, I mean, all the questions, we're being lit up with them. They're phenomenal. Thank you so much for making these. This is from Jim Makakis, and this is for everybody. What was one saying? This is, I'll kind of paraphrase a little bit. When you're in a terrible situation and, you know, it arose, and we've all been there, done that, how do you keep mentally to come back and do this again and again when you're dealing with something that could be as horrible as a patient death, an unexpected death, or even as a pediatric perfusionist dealing with a very ill pediatric perfusionist? So how do you come back the next day after you've had an event or you've been involved and do it over again to maintain your own physical well-being and mental well-being? Oh, and Ed, we'll start with you. Sorry.
That's a great question. I did pediatrics for 15 years straight on with Georgetown University. And I also did them on mission with Dr. Novick, the children heart thing in Belgrade. One of the things you have to do when you do your job is you have to know that you did the best you could do for that job. And when the outcome may not be what you want it to be, or what you even expected. And sometimes a patient will die, and sometimes, the outcome was shocking to you, but in the next breath, there's another patient that needs your care. You have to stop and go to that patient, and in your mind, you have to separate events and know that when you walked away from the last patient, you did the best you could do. And if you didn't, you shouldn't walk away yet.
Yeah, I've always felt, and I always taught the student that when things go badly in the operating room, one should never point fingers. It's assumed that oftentimes when things go wrong in the OR, it's a surgical problem, but we all know that's not true. And I think when things do go south, you have to recover from that very quickly. Your main task is to save that patient. If it doesn't happen, no matter what the cause is, and it ends up with you losing the patient in the OR, if you work in a well-organized team, you accept your area of responsibility and realizing that you have lost that patient. And I've always taught that to the student. In the OR, it's a little different. When you're in the ICU and you're removing a patient from ECMO, et cetera, and you're terminating, that's a whole different experience because you're there with the patient's families and you're sitting there with them, and you have to learn how to do that in a very professional way because you're terminating the bypass. And that's teaching a student that is extremely important if you happen to be in the OR and find yourself in that clinical situation. You lead by example. The acronym for the word team is together, everybody accomplishes more, not each, everybody.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. Michael?
Yes, to touch on the pediatrics, I was a pediatric instructor at University of Maryland, and I really enjoyed doing the babies and learning about them. They were a lot more challenging until I had children of my own, and then it became very difficult to go in there and separate myself from everything. Uh, Currently, we don't do peds at our hospital, but in the past, I also did a lot of per diem with ECMO, and I will have to say that probably those were the harder patients for me when I look back on my career. Ed, when you or somebody touched on when you have to terminate the case and you've gotten to know the family. Sometimes these patients are awake and talking with you. I mean, we all have patients that will stick with us for years. But again, I'm a big venter. I will vent to my husband. I will vent to my coworkers. And a lot of times I just need people to listen to me. But again, if you did the best you can do, that's all we can ask for.
Take solace through other individuals, right, Michael? That's a very good suggestion. Thank you.
Yeah.
Timmy?
Yeah, well, I think the ability to have a team that is a close team to whom you can discuss, and the importance of debrief after a particularly harrowing case or something that doesn't go according to plan is very useful. So I think getting the team together after the event and people sharing how they feel can be very useful. And of course, once you get home, you've got to be able to unload, if you will, and then having a conducive home atmosphere to do that. But I think the team debriefing thing is something that should be really grown in any organization.
Thank you. Well said.
Guys, yeah, Julian Williams asked a question that I really kind of want to hear a quick answer from you. I pretty much think we know what we're going to get out of it, but it's knowing what you know now. Would you still go into perfusion today, or would you have chosen a different career path? Ed?
Yeah, thanks, Jeff. I think I would, now that I've done what I've done, I certainly don't regret it. And would I recommend it for somebody? Absolutely. The technology always changes. If you want to go to work and you know that in 6 months or a year from now, you're going to be doing something different than you did today, that's great. I cannot personally myself go to an office and sit at a desk for 8 hours. I would go absolutely bonkers nuts. So I mean, I'm happy that I'm a perfusionist, and I would do it all over again for sure.
Jim?
Yeah, I would have to agree with what Ed just said. I happened to be at the right place at the right time, scrubbing for thoracic surgery, etc. And they picked me out of the crowd to run that machine, and I wouldn't have changed a thing. I would have changed a few things that might have happened to me during my career, but I certainly loved every moment of being a cardiovascular perfusionist from the training days onwards, and would go back into it again in a heartbeat.
Thank you, Jim. Michael?
Yeah, this actually was not my first, for my entire life, it seemed, as long as I could remember, I always wanted to be a veterinarian. So when I didn't get into vet school and I kind of fell into perfusion, looking back now, I've said so many times, thank goodness I did not get into vet school. This has been such a blessing. I've never lost sight of the fact of how fortunate and how blessed I am to do what I do and to work with the people that I work with. And I would not change anything. I was lucky enough to have a great work-life balance at both of my hospitals, where I got to spend a lot of time with my family as well as on the job. So it's been a real blessing for me. Yeah.
Thank you, Michael. Tim?
Yeah, well, I think perfusionists are sort of A-type personalities to a degree. I mean, I wanted to be an air traffic controller, but I didn't get into that. And so it's not too different, kind of being on the edge. And I think the other thing is, well, the fact that I've stuck with it for 50 something years is a testament to that, and I would do it again, but it changed in very unexpected ways. So you start out as a perfusionist in those early days, and then eventually you're into research, you're presenting, you're traveling around the world. Apart from the clinical developments that occur, so it's an evolving field, and I think that it's going to evolve again. You've got machine learning and AI, and who knows where it's going to go. So I think a fantastic opportunity and profession, and you can take it to where you want to.
Guys, I want to thank everybody. The question and answer, people are asking questions and answering them, and great comments from individuals. So if you get a chance, please look through the question and answer. I'm talking to everybody. Our panelists were asking them, but there's great answers here too. So I'm going to ask a question now, a little bit more emotional and personal, perhaps. You're all still practicing, and Jim's been a consultant after he finished for a large medical company. But what are your plans post-perfusion? What do you see yourself doing when you finally do retire and you're in the emeritus stage? And what are you going to be doing? What's going to be this next part of your life post-perfusion? So I'll start with Ed.
You're asking me now, Al?
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's kind of like, you're all still working, but there's going to be probably a time where you're going to hang up the clamps. So what's that going to look like for you? We call it retirement. I doubt a perfusionist ever retires. They move into their next phase. So what is that next phase going to be for you?
I think when you go to Emeritus, I would take some time and go back into consulting and do that on a part-time basis, because for myself, there's a few things in the world I want to see yet. So my wife and I, we would just go travel and do those things, and put that first on the list instead of second. Part-time, then do some consulting. There's obviously the legal consulting's out there, the biomedical consulting's out there. There's other avenues that a perfusionist can get into. And then with the new AI and these new pieces of equipment that are out there, there's a lot that can be done that you don't have to be behind the pump to do anymore. So there might be a job out there for me later to do something like that, and for everybody else who wants to leave perfusion and get into another profession. But if I would do it, I would do it part-time so that I could spend more time with, prioritizing travel more and doing the things I want to do, going to a hot spring somewhere and not pumping the case necessarily.
That work-life balance. Great, Ed. Thank you. Jim?
I am retired. I did my last clinical case in October of 2010, and then I consulted for a company which gave me the opportunity to travel and do teaching outside my normal environment, which I very much enjoyed. It allowed me to visit operating rooms all across North America, which is very interesting from a point of view, because you're involved in your own world, but when you travel and you visit, as many of you would know that, into different operating rooms, you get to see what other perfusionists do and recognize that there is a very homogeneous understanding, no matter where you go, of what that person is doing. I often found it when I visited a hospital and watched you do a case, it made me very proud to do what I do, or did at the time. So I consulted, I did that. Now I am fully retired. I still like to teach if I had the opportunity. I would like to teach students. I would like to talk to different perfusion schools, which I do on the occasion whenever I'm asked. I still feel I have something to give. I'm still reasonably healthy. Other than that, it's been great. I walk 6-7 kilometers every day, 5 days a week anyway. So I'm outside doing that, and life is great.
Thank you, Jim. Sounds exciting. Mike?
I never want to say never. At this point, the first thing that comes to mind is travel. I'm not sure that I would keep one foot in the business, but if one of the manufacturers or something reached out and was wanting to consult me on things, that I would certainly not be averse to that. With this new Essence data management system, they set something up with me. I don't know that it was, maybe there's another person in the US, but we helped develop that Essence management system with the Italians, through a few Zoom calls. So I enjoyed that. But other than that, traveling is big on my list as well. So
That's cool. Not too late to go to vet school. So,
yeah, that ship has sailed.
thank you, Michael. Tim?
Yeah, well, I'm winding down. This is going to be my last year, so I'm giving that some thought. I've grasped the concept of impermanence. I'm moving on, man. But I think that well, apart from I've got interest in beekeeping and a few other things, and some connections with Nepal, as you know, Al. But I think the one thing that I would keep on doing is running the perfusion incident reporting scheme that we run out of Australia, New Zealand. And that is something that I enjoy, and I think I will continue with.
We have a whole YouTube presentation on that. So it's very exciting. And actually, this country is now following in our Aussie, New Zealand footsteps, where Tim has been the designer of this in our own system. So thank you, Tim. Great to hear. Jeff?
I just, Al, we're almost at the top of the hour. And I just want to make one comment. I just want to thank all the panelists today. I know we're going to try to get one final thought from all of them, but my final thought is thank you for your service. Thank you for taking care of patients. Thank you for outlining exactly what we do today and for helping the community of people that are practicing and coming up, doing it better and doing it the way we do it. You guys are iconic in what you've done through the years, and you deserve a great thank you.
And with that, the final comment, we're just going to ask everybody to give one final thought that you could leave all of us with. And thank you for all of your words of wisdom. Ed?
Words of wisdom, that's great. I don't know, continuing education is key to this field. And I think that like the American Academy and the AMSEC and the things we currently have in place, not only here, but worldwide as well, you need to be part of that. So whether you're a student or not, you need to be joining that. You need to be part of it. Do what you can to help. And I think the career is going to change constantly. And I think who knows where the next 10 years is going to go, but it's not going to go down. It's going to go up.
Al, I think I'd finish off by echoing actually what Ed just said. Commitment to your profession and belonging to a society, whether that's AMSEC, the American Academy, the Canadian Society, whatever, the Australian Society, New Zealand, whatever, is very important. You will learn more from collegial support than you would ever realize. And you should take advantage of that low-hanging fruit. Commitment comes with its many toils, etc., but the rewards are wonderful. To be able to pick up a phone and call people to ask about a specific patient situation you find yourself in, and you only are able to do that by having access to colleagues and by being committed to your profession and do the very best you can outside the operating room in terms of professional development. And I encourage students to join our societies as soon as they can.
Yeah, I reiterate that as well. I'm a little over a year away from hanging up my pump clamps as well. But from what I see out there, and specifically at my account, it's going to be in good hands, my account and the profession. I really feel with the technology and with the students and the perfusionists that are out there now, they'll be doing this, and 30 or 40 years. And it's been a great run.
Great legacy to leave, Michael. Thank you. Tim?
Yora kia kaha. Well, I guess I'd endorsed everything that the other speakers have said. And I'd say be safe and have fun.
Thanks, Tim.
Great words to end with. I want to thank, on behalf of Jeff and myself and all of the organizers, Maggie Ring is the person behind the screen here who sets all these up for us. I want to thank Maggie. Most importantly, the four of you. You took a long time to prepare for this. You were absolutely spot on. Really enjoyed listening to all of you, and hope to have you back again and perhaps even expand this. I was thinking as you were all presenting, maybe we actually even ask some students to give us their perspective. It'd be nice to piggyback these with what an individual who's entering the field, or maybe somebody who's been practicing a year or two, what they see as well. So we'll keep that in our cache of things to go over. But I want to thank you all. You were superb, and especially I want to thank all the audience members. Loads of good questions and answers. Great chat, and we appreciate you all being here, and we want to thank you, and we'll look forward to you at our next session. So with that, thank you so much, and we wish you all a great evening.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody.
Bye-bye.